Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed at 1,000 subscribers. I'll be posting a special video. The contraction hit so hard I dropped my phone. I'm Emily, 29, and I went stupidly silent. My brain just froze while my belly clenched and burned. The only clear thought was this one: call Mark now. I grabbed the phone from the floor and unlocked it. The clock glared back at me and my throat tightened. This was earlier than my due date, and that scared me. I typed fast, fingers shaking. I think it's starting. His reply popped up almost at once and I exhaled. On my way, just leaving the office now. I stared at those words like they were a safety net. Back then, I still believed texts like that meant something. Another cramp rolled through and I leaned over the couch. I tried to breathe like the nurse had shown at triage. Inhale slow, exhale slower, pretend you are not terrified. My legs trembled anyway, and I checked his message again. I opened the contraction app and hit the big button. The numbers climbed while my heartbeat pounded in my ears. I kept telling myself they were false alarms again. Some part of me already knew this was different though. I dialed his number and hit speaker so I could brace. It rang and rang, each ring a tiny slap to hope. No answer, just his cheerful voicemail greeting from last summer. I listened through it twice before hanging up with shaking hands. Another contraction snapped down my spine and I swore out loud. I shuffled toward the bathroom and grabbed the counter for balance. A sharp pressure made me gasp and bend almost in half. For a second I honestly thought I might black out. I forced myself back to the couch and lowered slowly. I texted him again, shorter this time, less polite. Mark, I need you, they hurt, please answer your phone. The message whooshed out and I watched the empty screen. You know that stupid moment when you bargain with reality? I told myself he was driving and being careful with traffic. I told myself his battery was low and he conserved it. I told myself anything except the truth sitting in my gut. 5 minutes crawled by and the contractions kept stacking closer. The app buzzed a warning that it might be real labor. I laughed once, harsh and thin, like someone else in my mouth. My brain answered, fine, cool, your husband still is not here. I called him again and pressed the phone tight to my ear. This time it went straight to voicemail without even one ring. That tiny change punched the air out of my chest. Dead phone, I thought, not dead effort, not yet right. I tried his work desk line and listened through the options. Reception transferred me and the call clicked to empty silence. No answer there either, just the loop back to the main menu. I hung up before the recorded voice finished repeating the choices. Another wave hit and I dropped to my knees on the rug. My palms pressed down and I felt sweat on the fabric. This baby did not care about my plans or his delay. My body had started and it was not asking permission. That was the moment the fear really shifted inside me. Before that, I still played the chill wife holding everything together. I kept thinking about not overreacting, not being dramatic, not annoying him. Now all I could think was this: get help fast. I punched in the hospital number with clumsy, damp fingers. A nurse picked up, calm voice, efficient questions, simple instructions. She asked about timing, about pain, about if I could talk. My answer broke into gasps and she did not sound relaxed. She told me to come in now and not wait longer. She asked if someone could drive me, and I hated answering. My husband should be here, I rasped, still trying to believe that. Her pause through the line felt heavier than any contraction. Call emergency if you cannot get here safely by car. That sentence sat between us like a challenge and a dare. I looked at the door and imagined driving while my muscles spasmed. I already knew I had no business holding a wheel. I hung up and stared at the chat with Mark again. The last thing from him still glowed, harmless and ordinary. On my way, 2 hours old now, maybe 3, lost time. I scrolled up like more context would change those words. A smaller voice in my head whispered something I ignored. It said he had been distant lately, and that mattered now. It said this silence felt familiar, not random, not unlucky. I pushed it down because panic needs simple stories to breathe. I called him once more and listened to the instant voicemail. Hey, it's Mark, leave a message and I'll hit you back. My laugh came out wet and shaky, not funny at all. I'm in labor, I said, and I really need you. I almost added more threats and curses, raw things sharpening on my tongue. Instead, I ended the call and wiped my face with my wrist. I still cared how I sounded to a man who vanished. That part embarrasses me now more than the tears themselves. Another contraction slammed through my hips, and I yelled his name. The sound bounced back. CK from the empty hallway of our place. Nobody answered, obviously, yet I still waited one useless second. I realized I was done giving him extra minutes he did not earn. I opened my messages and scrolled to my neighbor's contact. For a moment my thumb hovered because I hated needing help. I pictured her kids, the late hour, the chaos at her place. I put the phone down again and told myself to be strong. Being strong lasted exactly until the next wave of pain landed. This one clawed down my spine and stole every solid breath. I gripped the couch cushion and tasted metal in my mouth. My vision spotted out, and that made the decision for me. I grabbed the phone again and hit 3 numbers with effort. The dispatcher answered fast, and I blurted everything in a rush. Words tumbled out: address, weeks pregnant, contractions close, husband missing. My voice cracked hard on that last phrase and stayed uneven. She spoke slowly, steady, like she had a hand on my shoulder. Help is coming, she said. Stay on the line if you can. She asked about bleeding, about movement, about if I felt pressure. I answered between groans and focused on not completely falling apart. I waddled toward the front door because she told me to. Unlock it now so they can get in fast, she urged. The deadbolt stuck and my hand slipped once before it turned. I left the door cracked open and leaned there, shivering, waiting. The dispatcher kept asking if someone could contact my husband again. I tried. His phone goes straight to voicemail, I muttered through clenched teeth. Okay, she said after a beat, and that single word stung. It sounded like she understood more about him than I wanted. I could hear distant sirens, and I prayed they were for me. Another contraction rose, and I braced my hands on the wall. My legs shook so hard I thought they might give completely. I kept picturing giving birth on the hallway floor alone. You know how people brag about their pain tolerance and grit? I always thought I was that kind of person under pressure. In that moment, I was just a scared girl with a phone. Every tough story I ever told about myself burned away. I shuffled back to the couch because standing felt impossible to maintain. The sirens grew louder and stopped somewhere close to our building. I could hear voices outside, boots on steps, a radio crackling. I said his name out loud again like he might materialize. The paramedics came in calling hello and asking for Emily. I raised my hand instead of answering at first, completely winded. One of them crouched beside me and checked my pulse quickly. His questions snapped me back into my body with a jerk. He asked when the contractions started and how far apart they were. I gave numbers that already felt wrong because they were closer. He nodded and looked at the other medic with a tight face. Let's get her loaded, he said, and my stomach twisted harder. They helped me up and I shuffled toward the stretcher near the door. Every step felt like pushing through thick water with heavy boots. I glanced at the hallway again, like maybe Mark would appear now. Of course it was just the open doorway and the night air. Is your husband meeting us at the hospital? One of them asked. He should be, I answered, trying not to sound like a liar. I almost added he promised. He texted, he said he was coming. The words stuck because repeating them made them sound ridiculous already. They strapped me in and lifted, and the ceiling swayed above. My phone sat on my chest because I refused to release it. Every buzz could be him, that was my logic at the time. I kept checking the screen like a reflex I could not break. As they rolled me toward the ambulance, I saw an unread notification. My heart kicked once, stupidly hopeful, and I tapped the display. It was a grocery coupon from some app I never used. I laughed once and the sound turned into a sob halfway. The paramedic climbed in beside me and started taking my pressure. He told me to focus on breathing and let them drive. I stared at the back doors and imagined Mark rushing after us. Looking back now, that was the last moment I truly believed he would. The stretcher bumped over a threshold and I grabbed the rail. Please check my baby, I blurted, voice rough and shaking. I did not care how I sounded anymore, I just needed proof. Someone answered, "We've got you," and we rushed deeper into noise. They swung me onto another bed and pulled belts across my belly. Cold gel hit my skin, and the monitor jumped to life. I stared at the jagged line and tried to match my breathing. "Is that normal?" I asked, already bracing for a bad answer. A nurse leaned close, calm eyes, firm tone, clipboard ready. "Who's here with you tonight?" she asked, pen paused in air. My husband," I managed, which felt generous even then. She glanced toward the doorway, like he might appear on cue. "Is he parking or on the way?" she asked. "Still writing." "He should already be here," slipped out before I could edit. Her eyebrows pulled together for half a second, then smoothed. "Okay, we'll keep an eye out for him," she replied slowly. Another contraction ripped through, and I clutched the bed rail harder. My feet pressed against the mattress like I could push it away. Someone counted through my breathing, and my vision narrowed to numbers. When it eased, I grabbed for my phone like a reflex. The screen lit up with nothing new, just the same old thread. My last 3 texts hung there, blue bubbles with no answer. I checked the signal, like that could explain his vanishing act. "Come on," I muttered, thumb hovering above his name again. I hit call and pressed the phone to my ear, ignoring everyone. Straight to voicemail, that cheerful recording I now hated with everything. I hung up before the beep, my jaw clenched so tight. A nurse adjusted a strap and pretended not to notice my face. "Let's see where you're at," another voice announced near my feet. The doctor snapped on gloves and gave me a quick warning. "You'll feel pressure," she said, which was an understatement on steroids. I gripped the sheet and tried to stay still while she checked. 8, almost 9, things are moving fast," she said, eyes sharp. She looked up at me, then at the empty spot beside me. "Is he usually quick to answer?" she asked, tone light but pointed. Heat rushed up my neck as I forced out, "He will come." I know how that sounds now, I really do. Back then I still clung to this picture of us. "You can start calling family if you want extra support." The nurse offered that like a blanket while she adjusted wires. I pictured my mother's face on video, worried and breathless. If I called her, I would have to explain his absence. That thought hurt more than the next contraction rolling through. "I'll wait a bit," I said, and even I heard the wobble. They wheeled me down a hallway that felt stupidly long and echoing. Doors flashed past, glimpses of other rooms, other people, other stories. I caught one scene, a man rubbing a woman's shoulder, whispering something. I dragged my gaze away before jealousy swallowed the little air I had. We slid into a delivery room, and they locked my bed in place. The nurse lifted my phone from my hand and set it near. "You want this close, right?" she asked, almost apologetic. I nodded because yes, I still hoped it would light up. The anesthesiologist rolled in with a tray and quick small talk. "Are you thinking about an epidural or want to keep going?" Another wave hit before I could answer, and I almost screamed. When it eased, the decision was already carved into my spine. "Yes, please do it," I gasped, fingers shaking against the rail. He nodded once and started his routine, explaining every step. "Any support person wants to come hold your hand for this." The silence after that question pressed harder than his gloved fingers. "I'm good," I lied, even though I was clearly not. I folded my hands together instead, nails biting into my palms. If you have ever pretended you were fine, you know that pose. It feels like armor, but it crumbles as soon as someone looks. The needle went in, and I forced myself not to move. My teeth dug into my lip, and I focused on the wall. He finished, taped everything, and told me it might take time. In my head I translated that to, "You get a short break." As the numbness crept in, the pain dulled to a heavy squeeze. I could breathe without biting back curses and wild sounds. The nurse smiled like she had seen this relief 1,000 times. "Better?" she asked, tucking a blanket around my legs like routine. "A bit," I answered, then glanced at the silent phone again. "What time is it now?" I asked, throat tight and dry. She checked the monitor screen and told me, casual but clear. I did the math, and my stomach turned harder than any contraction. Hours, I had been at this for hours without a word. Not a missed call, not a text, not a single update. My brain tried to spin excuses again, weaker this time, less convincing. Traffic, dead phone, work emergency. Anything except the ugliest possibility creeping in. The monitor beeped faster and the nurse frowned at the numbers. Baby's heart rate is a little jumpy, she murmured, adjusting the belt. She rolled me onto my side and slipped an oxygen mask over my face. My pulse hammered as I watched her move faster than before. Is something wrong? I managed through the plastic, voice muffled and thin. Baby's just reacting to all this activity, she answered, eyes fixed ahead. We're going to change your position and see if it settles. Her tone stayed controlled, but the hurry in her hands betrayed her. Another staff member slipped into the room and checked the screen. They spoke in low tones I was not meant to fully catch. Phrases like decelerations and watching closely floated up anyway. I clutched my own fingers tighter and stared at the open doorway. I kept expecting him to rush in, slightly out of breath. He would push his hair back, crack a weak joke, grab my hand. I could almost hear him say, "Traffic was insane, I'm here now." That script played on loop in my head while reality stayed blank. The numbers steadied after a few minutes and everyone exhaled. I had not realized I was holding my breath until then. The nurse squeezed my shoulder, quick and firm, then checked my progress. Almost there, she said, and this time it sounded like a warning. She pressed a button on the wall, and more people filtered in. The doctor returned, hair tucked back, eyes serious but not unkind. "All right, you're fully dilated," she announced, voice clear over the beeps. "We're going to start pushing with the next contraction, okay?" "Can we wait a little longer?" I asked, the words surprising even me. I knew how dumb that sounded, but it still came out. "Your baby is ready," she answered, gaze holding mine without flinching. "We need to work with your body, not against it, understood?" Shame and fear mixed in my chest like a bad cocktail. I nodded because what else could I do in that bed? The nurse lifted one of my legs into position and adjusted grip. "When I count, you push like you're angry at the world," she said. That made me bark out a laugh I did not expect. Angry at the world was an easy place to reach. I rolled my shoulders back, dug my hands into the sides of the bed. The next wave rose and swallowed anything but survival. "Deep breath, now push, 1, 2, 3, they counted in unison. I bore down with everything I had left, vision blurring at the edges. My face burned, my arms strained, the world narrowed to effort. When they told me to release, I collapsed back, chest heaving. "Good, again with the next one," the doctor encouraged, already focused. I turned my head toward the door without even thinking. Still empty, no footsteps, no familiar shape filling that frame. I swallowed hard and dragged my attention back to the people actually present. Another contraction hit and they repeated the drill, voices steady and practiced. "Big breath, push down, all the way to your baby." I pushed until I saw sparks behind my eyelids and tasted salt. Someone announced they could see the head and the room tightened. "Do you want a mirror?" someone offered, eager like this was magical. "No," I snapped, then softened it, "just get her out." My own words echoed in my ears, sharp and desperate and bare. That was the first time I said her out loud, without him included. The next surge barreled in and there was no space for thought. "Now this is it, big push," the nurse urged, grip solid on my leg. I pushed past the point where I thought I had nothing left. The burn, the pressure, the sound of my own guttural yell, everything blurred. Then a sudden release and a small, outraged noise split the air. The entire room shifted toward that sound like metal to a magnet. They lifted a tiny, slick body and placed her on my chest. I stared at her and then straight at the spot where he should have been. My arms trembled while I tried to keep her on my chest. She was still slick and furious, tiny fists punching the air. A nurse rubbed her back until the crying turned to wet hiccups. I kept glancing at the doorway like it might suddenly grow a husband. They clamped and cut the cord and I tried not to look. Someone announced numbers and something about her breathing being good for now. The word slid past me and stuck somewhere behind my ribs. "Do you want to call anyone for her first picture?" a nurse asked. I tightened my grip on my phone and woke the screen. No missed calls, no texts, just my own desperate messages lined up. "I'll get one," I answered, pretending that was what she meant. I lifted the phone with one hand and snapped a shaky photo. Her face crumpled again, and she wailed like the world wronged her. I pressed my cheek to her damp hair and whispered nothing words. Hey, you're okay, I repeated until I almost believed it. I knew I was lying to at least one of us. They took her to weigh and check, and I instantly felt empty. My hands hovered over the blanket like I still held her shape. Another nurse washed me up quickly, efficient movements, no time wasted. You did great, she said, eyes kind while she tidied the mess. Where's her dad again? She added, almost casual but not quite. He had trouble getting here, I answered, the sentence trailing off. I heard how weak that sounded and hated myself for it. Okay, she replied, and her mouth pressed into a thin line. They rolled her back to me wrapped tight, only her face visible. I pulled her close and she rooted around like she knew the script. We struggled for a bit, both clumsy and new at this. When she finally latched, a nurse smiled and quietly stepped away. That first quiet stretch should have felt like a miracle, maybe peace. Instead, I stared at the wall clock and did the math again. He had missed all of it, every scream, every push, every scare. I tried to swallow that fact and it caught like a bone. A tech came in with forms and a tablet and a practice smile. We'll get you moved to postpartum once you're stable, she explained briskly. Any support person we should list for wristbands or access. Just my husband, I answered, and the words tasted bitter and old. She typed something and glanced at the empty visitor chair beside me. Is he stepping out or still on the way? She asked. I forced a shrug, like this was just one of those days. He's had a crazy night, I muttered, and hated how protective I sounded. They transferred us to a smaller room and dimmed the lights quickly. The hallway noise faded behind the door, leaving beeps and her tiny breaths. I tried shifting to get comfortable, and everything inside me complained. The baby gave a little grunt and clutched my gown tighter. My phone rested on the tray within reach and I grabbed it. The battery icon glared at me, but there was still some left. I opened our thread again, like something might have changed while I blinked. It was the same dead conversation, frozen on my last plea. You know that feeling when the denial finally starts to crack open? It doesn't shatter all at once, it peels in layers. I stared at his last message from hours earlier and felt stupid. He had tossed me one line and vanished right before the main event. I typed erased, then typed again, each version angrier than the last. Your daughter is here, I wrote finally, fingers pressing hard on the glass. She's healthy, you missed everything. I hovered over send, then added, where are you? I watched the message try to deliver, then land with no response. No little dots, no read mark, nothing to tell me he cared. My chest tightened and I blinked hard so I would not soak her. The silence felt louder now that she was actually in my arms. A nurse popped in to check my vitals and look at her chart. Any luck hearing from Dad yet? She asked, adjusting my cuff. He's probably charging his phone, I answered, and even I winced. Let us know when he arrives, we'll get him banded, she said. After she left, the room settled into that weird hospital quiet. Machines humming, distant carts rolling, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I shifted the baby higher on my chest and studied her profile. Somewhere under the awe, a colder thought started to grow teeth. What kind of man ignores calls while his kid enters the world? What kind of husband lets emergency services bring his wife in alone? I tried to stack his good moments against that question and failed. The scale in my mind stayed tipped in a way I hated. Time blurred into short naps and nurses waking me to check things. Every time I opened my eyes, I checked my phone before anything. Still nothing from him, just a dark screen and my own reflection. I started to feel ridiculous for caring about a device more than rest. At some point, a nurse wheeled in a cart with paperwork and samples. We'll do footprints now and a quick bath if you're okay. I nodded and watched them carry her to the small station. The nurse glanced at the door again, like expecting a late arrival. Most partners panic and wander the halls, she said with a smirk. Last week one fainted when we showed him the umbilical stump. I gave a weak laugh I did not mean at all. Mine must be skipping the fainting part, I answered, and my jaw clenched. The footprints went on a little card, and I watched every press. That copy is for you, the nurse offered, tucking it by my water. We usually make another one for the other parent. Her eyes flicked up, waiting to see what I would say. He can get his own when he shows up, I replied. The edge in my voice surprised both of us for a second. She nodded once, slow, like she understood more than I had said. I turned away and pretended to adjust my pillow, though my hands shook. I must have dozed because the next thing I remember is a knock. The door opened before I answered, and a nurse stuck her head in. "You have a visitor," she announced, mouth flattening just a little. My heart slammed so hard it hurt, and I looked up fast. He walked in carrying a takeout coffee and a plastic bag. His shirt was wrinkled and his hair stood up in strange angles. He gave me this lopsided smile like we had just finished grocery shopping. "Hey," he said softly, as if he had stepped out for 5 minutes. I stared at him and could not pick which emotion to grab. Rage, relief, disgust, all of it hit at the same time. "Where were you?" came out before I could smooth it over. Not hi, not meet your daughter, just that sharp little demand. He set the coffee down and spread his hands like a magician. "My phone died," he started, eyes sliding toward the floor. "Work turned into CH. Ows, then traffic was a nightmare leaving downtown." The excuses lined up fast and easy, like he had rehearsed. "Your phone died for 6 hours, I asked, voice steady and thin. "Yeah, I didn't realize how low it was when I left." He rubbed the back of his neck and glanced at the baby. "I kept thinking I'd plug it in as soon as I got here." I looked at his face, searching for even a flicker of actual panic. He looked tired, sure, but not destroyed the way I had imagined for him. I wanted him wrecked by guilt, not just rumpled and mildly stressed. Instead, he took a breath and stepped closer like nothing irreversible happened. "Can I hold her?" he asked, reaching before I answered. My arms tightened around her automatically, a protective reflex I did not plan. I forced myself to relax my grip because I knew this mattered. "Wash your hands first," I said and pointed to the sink. He went to the sink and scrubbed quickly, water splashing everywhere. The smartwatch on his wrist lit up as his arm moved under the stream. A small banner scrolled across the screen, bright against the dark face. My eyes locked on it before I could look away. It was just a glimpse, but it drilled straight into my chest. A notification from a bar app, some loyalty program I never used. Under it, a recent activity line with a total from last night. The timestamp overlapped perfectly with the hours I spent calling. I felt my throat close and forced my voice to stay even. "Busy at work, huh?" I asked, my gaze still on his wrist. He turned off the faucet quickly and shook his hands dry. "Yeah, you wouldn't believe the day I had," he answered too fast. He came back toward the bed and reached for our daughter. I watched his hands, not his face, as he slid her from my arms. He cradled her gently and rocked on his heels like a natural. The sight made my stomach churn instead of calming anything. "Look at her," he whispered, eyes shiny like he might cry. "She's perfect, we did it." I felt something in me flinch at that "we." The only thing we had done together so far was pretend. While he fussed over her tiny fingers, the watch lit again. This time it stayed bright a little longer and I saw more text. A name I did not recognize flashed under a message preview. "Last night was crazy fun," it read before the screen dimmed. My whole body went cold from the inside out despite the blankets. I tracked his wrist like it might suddenly bite him in front of me. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked, aiming for casual and missing badly. He angled his arm toward his chest, blocking my view with his elbow. "Just some alerts and junk," he said, shrugging one shoulder. "I signed up for a bunch of stuff at the office." His eyes stayed on the baby, not on me, not on the watch. I pressed my lips together so I would not spit out everything at once. A nurse stepped in to check my chart and froze mid-step. "Oh good, you made it," she commented, glancing from him to me. He smiled at her like this was a normal first meeting. She marked something and left, but not before shooting me a quick look. That look held sympathy and a kind of quiet warning I recognized. I used to see it on friends' faces when they kept quiet. "Do you want a family photo?" she tossed over her shoulder. He brightened and nodded, already moving to stand near my bed. I let him hand the baby back and sit on the edge. We leaned together while she framed the shot with my phone. His watch buzzed against my forearm and I felt the vibrations. My smile in that picture hurts to look at now. After she left, he passed the baby to the bassinet carefully. I grabbed you something to eat, he said, gesturing to the bag. The smell hit me and my stomach churned, not from nausea. It felt like he was trying to patch a broken dam with napkins. I was terrified, I told him, staring straight ahead at the wall. I came here in an ambulance alone, and you weren't reachable. He sucked in a breath and set the bag down like it burned. I know I messed up, I just freaked out and lost track, he said. That word freaked snapped something small but important inside my chest. Who checks out of labor because they feel overwhelmed? I wanted to shout that question into his face until it cracked. Instead, I turned my head and looked at our sleeping baby. This can't happen again, I said quietly, but my tone was final. Next time she needs you, you answer, no matter what. He nodded fast, eyes wide, like that promise cost him nothing. Of course, this was a one-time thing, he replied, already rewriting history. His watch buzzed again and he muted it with a quick tap. I'll turn this off so it doesn't bug you, he added quickly. That tiny gesture should have felt thoughtful and considerate. All I could think about was what he did not want me to see. Even now, telling you this, I remember the exact heavy feeling. It sat lower than anger, deeper than normal disappointment. You're hurt. I knew something about that night did not match his story. I also knew I wasn't ready to rip it open while hooked to monitors. So I smiled like my face belonged to someone else and nodded. Fine, we can talk more when we're home, I said, voice flat. He relaxed at that, like I had just granted him a clean slate. Meanwhile, his turned-off watch might as well have been screaming at me. Her cry yanked me out of a dead sleep. My whole body lurched and my stitches screamed in protest. Across the room, he was curled in the visitor chair, mouth open. He didn't move at all while our newborn wailed 3 feet away. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, slow and clumsy. The bassinet rattled a little when I leaned in to scoop her. She rooted blindly against my gown, and I settled back with a grunt. Over her tiny shoulder, I could see his watch face, dark and innocent. I tried to focus on her, on the pull and ache and rhythm. Everyone tells you that first night feels magical and surreal. For me, it felt like running a marathon with a stranger on the sidelines. Part of me kept waiting for him to actually wake up and join us. Mark, I whispered, just to test if he was even lightly asleep. No reaction, not a flinch, just slow breathing and a soft snore. The sound grated in a way it never had before that night. I shifted our daughter higher on my chest and stared at his arm. That stupid watch rested against his forearm like nothing ever happened. Earlier he had turned it off with a quick tap and a smile. Now I could not stop replaying those flashes of bar totals in my head. My brain kept circling the same awful question over and over. What if he had chosen drinks while I dialed emergency services? Not an accident, not just traffic, but an actual choice to disappear. The thought made my stomach heave and my grip tighten on our daughter. I forced myself to breathe slowly so I would not wake her again. When she finally drifted off, I eased her back into the bassinet. My legs trembled when I stood, but I stayed on my feet. He still hadn't moved, arm dangling off the side of the chair. The phone lay half tucked under his thigh, screen face down. I stared at it and argued with myself in silence. Good wives respect privacy, right? That's the script we all hear. Good wives trust, even when the facts are screaming in neon. But good mothers do not ignore sirens going off in their head. I told myself I needed to know what kind of father he was. Not next year, not someday, right now while everything was still raw. If I was overreacting, I could put it away and apologize in therapy. If I wasn't, then I needed proof before he started rewriting last night. I padded over to his chair and paused right beside him. His hand twitched when I brushed his wrist to reach the phone. I froze with my breath locked in my throat until he settled again. Slowly, I slid the phone free and hugged it against my gown. The screen lit up with one tap and showed the lock keypad. I tried the code he used for almost everything, anniversary numbers. Red buzz wrong and my pulse spiked so high I felt dizzy. He had changed it and not mentioned that either. I tried his birthday next and got the same angry vibration. A third wrong guess and this thing would lock out completely. Behind me the bassinet creaked and I flinched so hard it hurt. My mind raced through possibilities while I watched the numbers blink. Face unlock. The thought hit like someone else had dropped it in my ear. I stepped closer to his chair, phone held out at arm level. My hands shook so badly I had to steady my elbows on the armrest. I angled the phone toward his face and waited for the scan. For a second nothing happened, and I felt ridiculous and cruel. Then the little lock icon flipped open and the home screen appeared. My heart hammered so loud I swear I could hear it in the beeping monitors. First thing I did was hit the side button and silence every alert. If anything chimed, this whole stunt would explode in my face. I opened his messaging app and stared at the list of threads. My name sat near the top, but not at the very top. Above me was a contact I didn't recognize, just a first name with hearts. The preview showed a string of laughing emojis and a still buzzing comment. My thumb hovered for half a second, then tapped the thread open. I felt like I was about to read a lab result with one word. The chat window jumped to the latest message and I scrolled up fast. There he was, my husband, talking about how fatherhood is a prison. He joked about one last night of breathing before the baby arrived. The timestamp on that line sat right over the time my contractions started. I scrolled higher and saw photos from the bar that evening. He had snapped selfies with shots lined up on the counter. In one picture his arm was slung around her shoulders, both of them grinning. The clock on the wall behind them matched the hour I dialed for help. My vision swam for a second and I had to blink hard. I could hear my own voice in my head from that night. Mark, I need you, while he held a glass and smiled for the camera. The split between those scenes made me feel physically sick. Further down, I found the part that finally broke something solid inside me. Her message read, "Did the baby come yet, or do we get another night?" His reply right under it said, "She's just having some cramps, false alarm." Under that, another shot of their drinks clinking together. He knew. That single detail cut deeper than anything else in that thread. He knew I was in pain, knew I thought labor had started. He called it a false alarm so he could stay out drinking. I kept scrolling with my thumb moving faster than my brain. There were more lines, him complaining about my mood, my fear, my weight. He wrote that I made everything about me and never let him breathe. She answered with jokes about trading places and how he deserved some freedom. Reading those words in a hospital gown with stitches fresh felt unreal. I glanced over at the bassinet just to ground myself again. She made a little squeak in her sleep and kicked one tiny foot. It hit me that he was writing about needing freedom from both of us. Near the bottom of the chat was a message from her after midnight. "Did you make it on time?" she wrote. "I feel kind of guilty." His answer came almost an hour later. "Missed the whole thing, long story." There was a winking emoji at the end, like it was some joke. That was when the shaking stopped and something colder settled in. I wasn't just sad anymore, I wasn't even just furious. I felt this weird flat distance, like I was watching myself from the ceiling. The woman in the bed looked like me, but she wasn't stupid anymore. I backed out of the chat and opened his photos with quick taps. There were more pictures from the bar tucked into a separate album. In one video, music blared while he yelled into the camera, "Last night of freedom." He looked happy, relaxed, lighter than I had seen him in months. The timestamp on that video lined up with my ambulance ride. While strangers loaded me onto a stretcher, he toasted to freedom. I remembered gripping the bed rail and calling his name between contractions. He was gripping a shot glass and shouting into his phone instead. My hands started to tingle, and I realized I was pressing too hard. I forced my fingers to unclench and breath through my nose. There was one last thing I needed to do before waking him. I opened my own contact in his phone and hit share on the whole thread. I sent the screenshots to my number and waited for the whoosh. Then I emailed them to myself for good measure, every message, every photo. By the time I finished, my palms were slick and my heart was racing. I cleared the recent screen and locked his phone with one last tap. For a second I considered slipping it back and pretending ignorance. I could have swallowed everything and lived in the version he preferred. But then our daughter made a tiny whimper and curled her fists. I knew if I stayed silent, I'd be teaching her something I hated. I walked back to his chair and stood right in front of him. "Mark," I said louder this time, not bothering to sound gentle. His eyes snapped open and he jerked upright, blinking in confusion. Then he noticed his phone in my hand and his face drained. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. I didn't answer, I just tapped the screen and opened the chat. The photo of him and the other woman filled the display. I held it where he could not avoid seeing it. He stared at it, then at me, throat working like he had swallowed nails. "That's not what it looks like," he started, and I actually laughed. "You were at a bar while I was calling for help," I said. "Tell me what exactly I'm misinterpreting here." He rubbed his eyes hard like he could erase the image. "It was just drinks after work, everyone went, it got out of hand." His hand hovered toward the phone, but I pulled it back. "You told her I was overreacting and called contractions a false alarm." He winced, shoulders hunching, and reached for a different angle. I panicked. Okay, all this stuff about being a dad just hit me. I needed a breather and things snowballed, and then my battery died. Each excuse stacked on the last one, thinner and more pathetic. "You filmed a video yelling about your last night of freedom," I reminded him. "While I rode in an ambulance by myself, hoping you were alive somewhere." His gaze dropped to the floor tiles and stayed there. "That was a stupid joke," he muttered. "I didn't mean it like that." "You missed her birth," I said, and my voice came out steady. "Not because you were trapped, not because you were hurt, because you chose shots over us." He flinched like the word chose hit harder than everything else. For once I didn't rush to pat it or soften it or rescue him. He glanced at the bassinet, then back at me with wide eyes. "If you had told me it was serious, I would have come. I thought you'd call again if it got real." He spoke like we were discussing a casual meetup, not my labor. "I did call again," I snapped, feeling something finally unhinge inside. "I called until your voicemail kicked in, I called your desk, I called everything. And when you didn't answer, I called strangers to come save me instead." Silence followed that sentence, heavy and sharp, with nowhere for him to stand. He ran both hands through his hair and let out a shaky breath. "I know I messed up," he said a little louder now. "It won't happen again, I swear, it was one night where I lost it." He sounded more scared of losing his comfort than losing us. The nurse knocked once and stepped in with a fresh chart. Both of us froze like kids caught fighting in the hallway. Her eyes flicked from his face to mine to the phone. "I'll come back," she murmured, and closed the door without another word. That tiny interruption gave me just enough space to decide my next move. I set his phone on the tray table, right where he could see it. I screenshotted everything, I told him quietly, and watched his pupils dilate. "So if you try to pretend this never happened, understand that I remember." He opened his mouth, then closed it, then tried again and failed. "I'm here now," he offered finally, like that solved anything. He reached for my hand, but I folded my arms across my chest. The gesture created a distance between us that felt new and permanent. I walked back to my bed and climbed in, slow and careful. The mattress creaked and our daughter stirred with a soft sound. I reached into the bassinet and rested my hand on her tiny back. Behind me, I could hear him breathing, but not saying another word. Lying there staring at the ceiling, I realized something important had shifted. This wasn't a rough patch or a misunderstanding we could smooth over. It was a line he had stepped across with clear eyes and steady feet. I knew right then that I would not be stepping back over it with him. I called a lawyer from the hospital bathroom the next morning. My hands shook so badly I had to brace on the sink. I watched the door and whispered so no one would overhear. Every ring on the line made my throat feel tighter. "Family law firm, how can we help you today?" The voice sounded bright, routine, like this was nothing unusual. "I just had a baby and I need information about leaving," I said. Hearing the words out loud almost knocked the air out of me. She asked my name and how old the child was right now. "Less than 24 hours, I answered, staring at my hospital bracelet. There was a pause, then her tone shifted from scripted to careful. "We can set a consultation this week, does that work for you?" We picked a time for a phone appointment after discharge. She explained they would walk me through custody and support basics. I grabbed at every detail like they were handholds on a cliff. Please email everything, I said. I can't have papers lying around. When I hung up, I just stood there and listened. Out in the hall, I could hear carts rolling and quiet voices. My reflection in the metal dispenser looked wrecked and strangely clear. I washed my face, dried it, and practiced a neutral expression. When I walked back into the room, he was holding the baby. He bounced on his heels and made soft noises near her ear. You were gone a while, he said, eyes still on her face. Bathroom, I answered, and I asked about discharge. That part was technically true, which made it easier to deliver. He nodded and looked relieved, like our biggest problem was timing. I can't wait to get you both home, he added, voice warm. The word home landed differently now, heavier than he meant. The doctor came by with the usual checklist and standard warnings. She talked about rest and pain management and follow-up appointments. He nodded along, promised he would help, promised he would be present. I watched his mouth move and thought about his messages from the bar. When they wheeled me out with the baby in my arms, he filmed. He walked backward down the corridor trying to capture this moment. First ride, little one, he said, grinning at the camera. I smiled for the video and tasted metal behind my teeth. In the car, he buckled the seat and double-checked every strap. You okay back there? He called, glancing at me in the mirror. Fine, I answered, one hand on my incision and the other on the handle. The drive felt short and endless at the same time. He put on music, then turned it down when she made a noise. You're so quiet, he said, fingers tapping on the steering wheel. I'm tired, I answered, which covered maybe 10% of it. The rest stayed lodged somewhere under my ribs. At home, he rushed. To carry everything inside before I stepped out. Don't lift, just focus on her, he insisted, holding the door open. If you walked in right then, you would have seen a caring partner. You would not have felt my whole body tense when his watch buzzed. He pressed some buttons and flipped it to airplane mode without looking. Too many notifications already, he joked, tossing his keys farther inside. I watched the quick movement, the practiced way he shut it down. It told me more than any long speech ever could. We settled on the couch for the first feed at home. He tucked a blanket around my legs and sat close. Last night scared me, he started, voice low and shaky. I know I messed up and I'm going to do better. I studied his face, searching for something beyond rehearsed regret. There was moisture in his eyes and his shoulders drooped. If I didn't know about the bar and the messages, I might yield. Instead, I just nodded once and focused on helping her latch. I want us to move past this, he continued, staring at his hands. I don't want her to grow up with fighting and tension. The irony of him worrying about that now almost made me laugh. You had a choice about that, I answered, voice dry and flat. He flinched and looked over at the baby sleeping against me. I keep thinking about missing it and I feel sick, he said. I swear if I could redo that night, I would. I believed that part, honestly. He hated consequences more than anything. The doorbell rang and cut through the heavy air in the room. He jumped up fast, grateful for the interruption, grateful for new witnesses. It was my sister with bags and a look that saw too much. She hugged me gently and peered at the baby with wide eyes. Look at her, my sister breathed, hands hovering near the blanket. I saw her glance flick from my face to his and back. She read tension like other people read headlines. We brought some things in case you needed help tonight, she added. He played host, offered drinks, cracked jokes, tried to steer the mood. I watched him shift into a version of himself built for company. He told a toned-down version of the labor story that left out everything. My sister listened, then looked at me, waiting for my version. He wasn't there, I said plainly, cutting through his narrative. Her eyebrows shot up, then lowered, then froze at some middle point. She looked from him to me again and set her bag down. What happened? She asked, voice slow and careful. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand without thinking. I have screenshots, I said, because I was done shielding him. Her gaze sharpened like someone flicked a switch behind her eyes. We can talk later, she replied, which was code for I'm not letting this go. He stayed on his best behavior while she was in the room. He fetched diapers, burped the baby, offered to handle every little task. If a stranger filmed that afternoon, they would see the perfect new father. My sister saw my clenched jaw and my eyes on his turned-off watch. When she finally left, she hugged me longer than normal at the door. "Text me if you need anything," she whispered next to my ear. "Yeah," I answered, "I already booked something important." She pulled back and gave me a brief nod, like she understood exactly. That first night at home stretched out in chopped segments of sleep. Every time the baby stirred, I jolted up sore and panicked. Sometimes he moved, sometimes he pretended not to hear. It didn't take long to understand who the default parent already was. At 3 in the morning, she screamed with that new raw shriek. I swung my legs off the bed and bit back a groan. He rolled over, dragged a pillow over his head, and mumbled something. My patience snapped the second his hand grabbed the edge of that pillow. "Get up," I said louder than I meant, lungs burning. He jerked, blinked at the clock like it had betrayed him. "She's hungry," I added, already halfway toward the bassinet. "You can at least change her while I get ready to feed." He stumbled over and picked her up, arms clumsy with sleep. She wailed in his ear and he winced, pulling her slightly away. "Why is she so loud?" he muttered, fumbling with the diaper. "Because she is a newborn," I thought, "and because you vanished." When we settled back in bed, I leaned against the headboard. He lay on his side watching us with glassy, tired eyes. "You're amazing," he murmured, like flattery could patch structural damage. "You're stronger than I expected." I looked down at the tiny face pressed against my skin. The word "expected" landed strangely, like he'd bet against me before. "Yeah," I answered, "I'm noticing that too." He didn't catch the edge in my tone, or he ignored it. The days blurred into a loop of feeds, diapers, and short naps. Between tasks, I checked my email for the lawyer confirmation. Every new message made my pulse jump until I saw the heading. Consultation Co. Confirmed finally appeared on the screen late one afternoon. I scheduled the call for a time I knew he'd be out. He had a regular game night he refused to give up even now. "Yes, just a couple of hours, I need the break," he insisted. I nodded, thinking perfect leave, I have my own plans. When the evening came, he kissed the baby's forehead at the door. "I'll keep my phone on this time," he joked with a weak smile. I didn't laugh, I just moved our daughter higher on my shoulder. "Make sure you do," I said, and held his gaze until he looked away. The minute the door clicked shut, I grabbed a notebook and pen. I dialed the firm, hands less shaky than in the hospital bathroom. The lawyer came on the line with a calm, steady voice. "Tell me what's going on," she requested. "Start with the recent events." So I walked her through the ambulance, the delivery, the missing husband. I kept it lean, just the facts, no dramatic flourishes or excuses. Then I described the bar, the messages, the video, the false alarm comments. I heard her quiet inhale when I mentioned missing the birth by choice. She asked about finances, housing, and whether there was any physical danger. "Not physical," I said, "just a complete lack of reliability and respect." She explained custody basics, how courts looked at involvement and safety. Words like primary residence and parenting plan started to sink in. "The biggest thing," she added, "is to document behavior from now on. Keep records of missed visits, concerning messages, anything that shows a pattern." I thought about his idea of a night of breathing while I labored. "Trust me," I said, "a pattern won't be hard to show." She outlined options, from immediate separation to waiting and gathering more. "Legally, you don't have to decide tonight," she reminded me gently. "But you do need a personal line that cannot be crossed again." I looked at my baby sleeping against my chest and knew that line already existed. After the call, I sat in the quiet living room and listened. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked, my daughter snuffled softly. I realized I was breathing deeper than I had in days. The future still scared me, but it finally had an outline. When he came back from game night, I could smell drinks underneath gum. He tried to step lightly, shoes in his hand, shoulders loose. He froze when he saw me awake with the baby on my chest. "You're up," he said, almost guilty, almost annoyed. "How many did you have?" I asked, voice level, not loud. "Just a couple," he answered, dropping his keys on the table. He looked away as he said it, which told me enough. "You drove home after that?" I asked, every word very slow. He tensed and bristled like I'd insulted him in public. I know my limits, I was fine, I would never risk her. He jerked his chin toward our daughter, using her as a shield. The way he said never did not match the night at the bar. Here's where I am, I said, cutting through his defense. I don't trust you with my body or hers when you drink. And I don't trust you to show up when it matters. He stared at me like I had slapped him across the face. That's harsh, he snapped, hands curling into fists at his sides. You're acting like I'm some monster who doesn't care at all. I almost laughed at that, the bar messages still burned in my mind. You had a chance to care when I needed you most. He paced the room, muttering about stress and pressure and expectations. Every so often he would glance at our daughter like she was proof. I'm here now, I'm trying, that should count for something, he insisted. It did count, but not enough to erase deliberate abandonment. I booked a call with a lawyer, I told him plainly. His foot stopped mid-step and he swung his head toward me. You what? He asked, eyes wide like I'd suggested arson. I wanted to know my options if this keeps going, I answered. So you're already planning to take her away, he accused, voice rising. I give one wrong step and you run to a lawyer. He jabbed a finger toward the hallway like there was someone listening. That's nuclear, Emily, that's extreme. I held his gaze and refused to flinch this time. I'm planning to protect my child from someone who ditches emergencies. If you don't like that word, change the way you behave. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, throat working hard. The next week became a quiet test I ran without announcing it. I watched how often he volunteered for night duty without prompting. I watched how quickly his phone went face down when alerts popped up. I watched whether he looked at her like a person or a weight. Sometimes he did try. He took over diaper changes in the evening, hummed while walking her. He sent photos to relatives and wrote those proud new parent captions. Anyone outside would have seen improvement and maybe called me unforgiving. But then there were nights when his friends texted everything shifted. His eyes would light up and his attention drift toward the hallway. I'll just be gone for a bit, clear my head, he would say. Every time he said that, I saw the ambulance doors in my mind. The last straw came 3 weeks after we got home. Our daughter woke hot and fussy, her cry thin and strange. I knew something was wrong in the same instant I heard it. I touched her forehead and felt heat that scared me badly. I checked the small thermometer twice because the number felt unreal. Too high for someone that tiny, too high for my comfort. My chest started to pound and I dialed the pediatric line fast. They told me to bring her in immediately, no waiting, no delay. He was in the shower while all this unfolded. I knocked hard on the door and raised my voice. She has a fever, we have to go now, I called. Give me a minute, he answered like I'd asked about a sink. I stared at the door and felt something dark settle. 1 minute stretched into several while I packed the diaper bag. Her crying ratcheted higher, thin and breathy, and I almost called an ambulance again. By the time he came out, hair wet, I was already at the door. We're leaving now, I said, holding the car seat with shaking arms. She's burning up, I am not waiting for you to find shoes. He frowned, grabbed a clean shirt, and tried to pull it on fast. I said I was coming, calm down, he muttered under his breath. We reached the clinic and rushed through intake, my heart in my throat. They checked her vitals, took samples, spoke in quick medical shorthand. She ended up needing medicine and observation for several hours. I sat in the chair beside her and watched every breath. He spent most of that time scrolling on his phone in the corner. Sometimes he glanced up, sometimes he took a picture, sometimes he sighed. I remember thinking, this is exactly what it will always be. Me gripping the rail, him half present, half somewhere else. When we finally got home, her fever down, my mind was set. He dropped his keys on the counter and complained about missing a meetup. Next time we should call your mom so I can stay rested, he said. That sentence flipped a switch inside me I could not unflip. There won't be a next time like this, I answered, voice calm. He looked confused, like he'd missed a step in the conversation. What does that even mean? He asked, hands spreading slightly. It means I'm done pretending this is a team, I replied. That night after he fell asleep, I pulled out a suitcase. Every zip sounded too loud, but I kept going anyway. I chose clothes, documents, baby stuff, only what we needed immediately. My hands shook, but they never paused. I packed her birth certificate, the insurance papers, the lawyer's email printout. I grabbed a few sentimental things in one fast sweep. I didn't touch anything of his, not one item, not one gift. Leaving his things untouched felt like drawing a line in permanent marker. My sister pulled into the lot just before dawn, lights off. I had texted her earlier, a simple sentence, "I'm leaving today." She walked in with a quiet purpose that made my chest loosen. "You sure?" she asked, eyes on the suitcase by the door. "I watched him pick comfort over us more than once," I answered. "That's enough to be sure." She nodded, no lecture, no long speech, just acceptance. That kind of support feels like being handed solid ground. We buckled the baby into the car seat while she slept. I kissed her forehead and promised her things she couldn't hear yet. Safety, consistency, a parent who came when she cried. Behind me, the bedroom door stayed closed while the clock ticked. I wrote a short note and left it on the table. Nothing dramatic, nothing poetic, just what needed to be said. "I know about everything, I won't raise her in this, we're safe." My hand shook on the last period, but I did not rewrite it. As we stepped out, my sister glanced back toward the hallway. "You want to wake him?" she asked, fingers on her keys. "No," I answered, "he already slept through enough important moments." I closed the door softly and felt something in my chest unclamp. In the car, my daughter stirred, then settled again. The sky was just starting to lighten at the edge of the buildings. I watched the rearview mirror where her tiny hat barely showed. For the first time since the contractions started, my breathing matched my heartbeat. I am not going to pretend leaving felt triumphant or easy. Part of me still wanted him to run after the car apologizing. Part of me wanted him to magically become the partner he advertised. But the bigger part wanted her to grow up without thinking this was normal. So no, he didn't wake up to some grand ultimatum speech. He woke up to an empty bedroom and a quiet house. He woke up to a note instead of a crying newborn and wife. I am sure he called me, but my phone stayed on silent. I let everything go to voicemail that morning while I held her. I listened to some later, the ones where he sounded panicked. He talked about misunderstanding, about stress, about fixing things, about therapy. He never once mentioned the bar messages until I brought them up by email. That's where we are now, working through lawyers and written plans. He gets scheduled time, supervised for now with clear boundaries. I track every visit, every cancellation, every late arrival. I do it not out of spite, but because patterns matter. When people ask why I left so soon after giving birth, I pause. It would be easier to shrug and say we grew apart. Instead, I usually say, he didn't show up when it counted. Most mothers know exactly what that means without any extra explanation. The night my daughter turned 1 month old, I sat by her crib. I thought about that first ambulance ride and the empty chair. I thought about the bar tab that overlapped with my contractions. Then I looked at her sleeping face and felt the answer settle. I chose her over his comfort and over the version of us I used to protect. I chose her over the story I'd told myself about our marriage. And honestly, I chose myself too, the part that still believed I deserved better. That choice hurt, but it also finally felt like showing up.